things, and you shouldn't do this because. And so what these people were doing, they were trying to give advice, but what they were doing was telling them how not to write a book, because
Yeah,
you don't
exactly.
write a book about all these wonderful people who always behave the way they should. the
Exactly.
A book is a story, is about people who do wrong things and
Well, it's
encounter
about conflict.
difficulties and
You have to
have
have conflict in there.
there has to be conflict. So
Yeah.
immediately taking the stance that a good boss wouldn't do that means that, first of all, you're setting this up as a good boss. Who says he's a good boss?
Hmm.
This business may be in
Well,
all
you're
kinds
also
of trouble.
setting the bar too high for your characters, because every single one of your characters are flawed in
They
some way,
have to
because
be.
every single human being is flawed in some way. Sorry if you think you're not flawed, but you are. We all are. We all
Right.
have flaws. And so, a good story, a good character-driven story, will highlight those flaws. And if it's done well in, in the deep in the character's point of view, then you'll understand what the character has to go through in order to do. Sometimes they're very self-aware, sometimes they're not very self-aware, and they're doing it. And the thing about point of view, I just want to add, is that if you're doing point of view properly when you're writing, your character doesn't have to be right, but it does have to be their opinion.
Right.
So when you're writing in their inner monologue, then you have to make sure that you're true to their opinions and beliefs for the time. The reader can know that they're wrong. No problem with that. But they don't necessarily yet know that they're wrong.
Right. And they may never
Right?
find out. Depends on how the thing is going. Like my character in this new book is, she's going to be in several books, and she's not going to figure this out. It's going to be a journey to figuring out, you know, how she can better find peace in her life, and like things seem to go her way, but nothing ever kind of makes her happy. So, so these are all, and I like my one of my favorite characters is a guy who um, is the nicest guy you could ever meet. He never says
Right.
no to anybody. If anybody wants anything, he's right there. And I made sure that that was a flaw,
Right.
because you can't say yes to everything and have it always go swimmingly. And at one point, he says yes when he shouldn't have. And so, and the whole thing is that he keeps doing these things, and it causes, difficulties here and there. But there's one big thing that he, and that is his personality. So they all, even the nicest guy in the story, has a big personality flaw, and it is that he's just too darn nice and he can't say no. And there's some people you should say no to. And
Absolutely.
so all of that. So I find that they are giving advice from the point of view of uh, themselves, not themselves as an author. And I always tell people, like, to really dig into your character and say, okay, this is who she or he is. This is who they are. Write it out if you have to. Write a character like, where did they go to school? What did they do? And what is their childhood? You don't have to put it in the book. But
Right.
like I know my character had a really hard childhood. Some of it's in the book or later years, but she had difficult early years, and
Right.
because she grew up in rural Newfoundland and it was a hard time, and she was with a poor family, and wound up in service with her mother when she was 10, and um, you know, so all those things happen before the book starts, right? And
Yeah.
and so you have to get to know that, but so killing
Well,
off
this
a
that's
character
the
is
other
hard,
side of
but
it. That you just hit on an interesting point, because just because it's backstory the author needs to know, it isn't necessarily a story the reader needs to know. So understanding what your starting point is in a novel is really important,
yes,
really important. And a lot of writers don't get that.
no,
I mean, there's been at least 3 novels where I had to actually eliminate a prologue, or because I am a fan of prologues, I don't care what anybody says. I had to either eliminate a prologue or eliminate the first chapter, because it's not, I wasn't starting at the starting point. And the starting point is the inciting incident whereby the path on which the characters currently flow changes. What is that inciting incident? What is the thing that changes their path? And in romance, it means putting them on the same path. What
well,
happened to now take them off their own separate paths and put them on the same path?
It is
And that's
very
it in a nutshell.
it is very common for me. This is my fifth book. Well, one was a poetry book, so it's a little different, but my fourth narrative style book, novel, and or short story, short stories as well. This is my fifth book, and what I have found almost 100% is that I will write the book and think it's done, and wind up taking out the beginning, because I think what I do is when I start, I kind of just start telling the story that I have in my head. It evolves
Yeah,
into something bigger, and it becomes a different story than what I have in my head. Like it just grows from that, and
absolutely,
and then
absolutely.
so I find that the beginning suddenly, when I read it again after, like I put it aside for a while and come back and read it, and all of a sudden I'm like, I don't even need this. Like, why am I writing
No,
all this? This is not necessary. I could take this and put it into one paragraph and introduce the story, and boom,
exactly.
she's where she's
And
supposed to be in it.
early on in my writing career, my novel writing career, I did the same thing. I never really knew how a story began until I typed the end. And but now I can almost, it's almost like a 5-second movie in my head
Yep.
that I can flip forward and see, okay, well, I know what the resolution is going to be, because a lot of my novels are politically driven. And so I know what the end political climate needs to be, and I know who needs to get there, and I know it's romance, so there has to be a happily ever after. So I can very quickly say, okay, well, this should be the starting point. And in the last 4 books, I've not changed the beginning. And but interestingly enough, the first scenes that I wrote in that email exchange for Bound to the Highlander, of all the things that changed in that novel over the years of rewriting and learning how to properly write a novel, those scenes never changed. It's funny,
It is,
almost word for word from when I first wrote them.
and one thing I tell writers too when they're starting out, especially when they're starting out, they don't know yet. Uh, you know, you're excited to get words on a page, like you're going to get these words on a
Yeah.
page, but don't get too attached to them, because
No, you
you
need to
have to
kill
be
your darlings
brutal
sometimes,
later on.
as Stephen King says.
Yeah, yeah. Just rip them out. Be brutal.
Yep.
Um, I can go even more local. When I was writing, and Bill Rowe here in the province, and he's written several novels and nonfiction books, but he likes writing novels and he loves writing fiction. And he says you just got to be brutal. Like you may have to kill somebody off, like you did. You may
That's
have
right.
to rip out half your book because it doesn't work with what you planned. You may not.
Exactly.
I ripped out
Yeah.
before I submitted, the week before I submitted my book to the publisher to see if they were interested in publishing it. It was done. It was completely
Yeah.
done. And then I ripped out a chapter and a half and rewrote a paragraph to replace it that was completely different, just a little
Yep.
opening sort of, because I try to write, I try to find the balance between the drama of it all and the story and a little bit of literature. I'm a poet, right? So I like to have a
Yep.
little bit of uh, you know, a little bit of prettiness in there, but not enough that the reader doesn't go on. So a paragraph at the
Yeah.
beginning is plenty, right? And
Mhm.
introducing the character, and then boom, something happens. And so I did all that, and then looked at it and went, I can't even believe I did this, because this was ready to submit. And I was just looking at the submission guidelines and getting ready and finding that little gap of time. And now suddenly I've like, what have I done? And I was like, no,
Right.
this is better. I don't need all that. And that chapter and a half had been there for 5 years.
Yeah.
you
Yep.
know?
Yep.
And it's like,
Absolutely.
you know what? I didn't delete it, mind you. It's sitting somewhere because it could, be rewritten. There was some cute things in there that might, but never throw it away. But it's not
No,
in the
no,
book.
no. There
And
could be something there that could inspire you for a different piece. So you never throw anything out.
right,
But you do need, and it comes with experience. It
yes.
comes with experience working with a good editor, and a good editor is worth their weight in gold. I've
Oh,
seen good editors and poor editors, both with publishers and both as an independent writer, an independently published author. Don't think for a second that just because you're going with a traditional publisher that you're going to get a great editor. That isn't always the case. They have a bottom line to look at too. And don't think that just because you're independently published that you're going to get a poor editor. There's some phenomenal freelance editors out there. So it's a matter of finding the editor that's the right fit for you, because at the end of the day, they have a job to do, and that is to critique your work. So you have to get a bit of a thick skin. You have to be open to having somebody explain to you that you can't have head hopping in a romance novel. Sorry, if you insist on it, then I can't help you.
Do you want to
There's
explain
different
head
things. There
hopping?
has to be push and pull.
It's so interesting that I did a lot of courses through some universities and stuff and mostly online, but still through universities and something.
Hmm.
Never encountered the term head hopping. Now I'm
That's
sure I
right.
encountered descriptions of what it is that were not called that. I know what it is. Never
Yep.
encountered that term until I started meeting romance writers.
That's right. That's right.
And
And I tell you exactly why. I tell you why it's important. Because a romance novel is a journey between two people, and it's a romance journey between two people. It's heavily character driven. It's you want to be as connected as possible to the emotional state of each character, whether you're doing it from a single character's point of view, or as I prefer, I like to get inside the head of both my hero and my heroine, so my two protagonists. So in order for me to encourage a reader to be as deeply connected to my characters and care for them and root for them and want them to get together, even though they're flawed, even though they have lessons to learn, I need to make sure that each scene there's good solid time spent in that character's point of view. So the rule of thumb has emerged that you stick with one point of view per scene. So each chapter, the way my chapters are usually structured, it's half and half. Half the chapter is from one protagonist's point of view, and the other half is from the other point of view. It's not the same scene doubled over. The story still drives forward, but you get that good solid time deep inside that character's head so you understand them and you root for them and you have a better understanding of the conflict, the inner and the internal and the external conflict between the characters and what's actually keeping them apart.
right.
So if you're head hopping, if you have a scene and you're going back and forth between the characters, you're not going to have that time spent with that character to really have that deep understanding of them.
Right. And so obviously that is taught. Like I've learned that. We just
Mhm.
didn't call it head hopping. we
Right.
called it, point of view. You have a point of view. So when you're in a point of view, you have to be
Mhm.
careful. So I write in third person nearly, like that's my comfort level. It's where I am.
Yep.
I don't even read a lot of first person point of view.
No,
But
I don't
even
either. I'm a third person. I'm a third person writer as well.
right. And so from writing third person, and the reason I do that is so that I can um, explore all the characters, not just the one, because in first person, obviously, the only person's point of view that you can explore is that particular character, right? That character. So
Right.
if if it's not in front of her and she can see it with her eyes, she can't be a part of it. So when two other characters go off in boat, you can't write about that because she's not in the boat with them, right?
Exactly.
So
Yep.
so that's
And
what
that's called that jumps into the other thing that a lot of romance writers a good lesson that they need to learn is something called author intrusion,
right,
because if she's if your heroine is in a room and she's commenting on how glowing her skin looks on her face right now, and there's no mirror in front of her, how does she know that? That's
right,
something that she can't know. She can only experience what she can see with her eyes, feel with her hands, taste with her mouth. That's so anything outside of that is author intrusion. And
right.
that will potentially sever that connection between the reader and the character. So you want to be really careful with that. And that's a really difficult one to do. That took a lot of rewriting for me to wrap my head around how I was continuing to inject my own author voice into the character. And I was like, okay, now hang on now. I can have an author voice, I can have a style and all of that, but I can't put my own opinions and I can't put my own I suppose lens on her, because the reader needs to connect with her, not me. I need to remove myself from that and just